So there are various elements to this material that we see on the buildings, and there are different layers. We are going to look at that now, but the first step was to generate some image maps which were used to build this material. And for this I used a free application called JS Placement. The first map I generated was the JS Placement 2 type. You just click anywhere here to create the type of map you want. It's this sort of sci-fi panel. You can change it to different types of maps too, but we just go with the classic set. Once you're done, you save this to as the height map. That's going to be the black and white map version of this. I already have mine, so I don't need to repeat this. And then we also generated a dot grid. With this one I disabled some of these, so all the circles I think I got rid of. And I put the max pattern length up to be higher. It creates these larger looking blocks or groups of dots. So we save this out, and that's what we're going to use. So it's the height for this one too. You can see I've saved out a bunch of these prior to this recording. We've already created the material earlier when I applied it to their buildings, so we're just going to continue with that one. Let's call that buildings. In the color channel is where the first grayscale map is going to go into. So if I just click that texture bar and load in my JS Placement 2 type map, you see it changes the color on their buildings, but it's being projected incorrectly, and we need to change that. So go to the map, the projection, change it to cubic. And that's the texture tag, by the way, not the map. The material tag or texture tag. And it's being tiled too large. So I found a length of 1000 worked out quite well for this. So now we are getting this kind of thing. There isn't any illumination, so we're not going to see the effects of that yet. But we can go to reflectance and get a new reflection layer. So I think it's going to look like this normally. Let's add reflection legacy. The roughness is going to be at 0 and specular at 0 too, but the attenuation will be additive. Let's add this to the layer underneath. When we hit render, we are going to start to see the buildings reflect those lights and that fog we put into their scene. It's too reflective, however, so we need to break up that reflection. And the way I'm going to do this is to use the same image in the layer color of our reflection. So paste it here and another quick render. We now get this kind of thing, much more subdued, and I think it works better. Let's send this to the picture viewer so we can continue making those comparisons when we change something. We are now going to spend a lot of time in the luminance channel to create the rest of this material. The dot grid pattern is responsible for these lights that we see on the sides of the buildings. But we have more than that too. We have the highlighted edges of the buildings. Those were some other layered effects built into their material. Let's jump into the luminance channel, turn it on, and start with just bringing in our dot grid material. I'm going to pick this example here. Click no for this. It may be helpful to get the interactive render. So once again, we can see the changes as we make them. I'm going to do the whole preview window. And the quality slider, this little triangular arrow, I'm going to put this all the way up to the top. So now we see the lights working. Once again, I'm going to send this to the render. This is before and this is after. We need to layer those other effects on top. And for this, we need to click the drop down on the texture in the luminance channel and go to layer. And now we can stack different effects and layers together here. So the effect I'm going to get is the Fresnel under shader and Fresnel. You see, this is going to create some bright edges over the buildings, except it's covering the whole building right now. Let's open this up and make this narrower, this white section. So bringing in the black handle from the other side. It's thinking about it, but there we go. It's covering up our bitmap image. So we need to go back to these layers and put the Fresnel's blending mode to be add or screen or something which is going to blend with the layer underneath. I will go to the luminance at this level and put the brightness up to 200%. You see nothing changes because the layer is overriding the brightness up here. So we need to put this mix mode to multiply so that it combines the two of these layers together. It's much brighter now, but I would also say it's looking too busy. There are just too many things being reflected around, but we'll deal with that later. For now though, let's continue building the material, and what we want to do next is this multiple colors effect. And this was done by combining some things in the luminance channel with the shader effector. So that's the shader that came up during the MoGraph section briefly. We are now going to see one of the things you can do with that. I'm going to go back into the luminance layer though, and this Fresnel I will drop down to 25%. I want the window lights to be brighter, but the edges don't need to be so bright. Anyway, there are quite a lot of steps involved with the multiple colors effect, but let's go through them now. The first step is to bring in a shader effector. And I'm gonna undo my camera move here. I don't want to lose that position I was rendering with this whole time. Let's jump out of that camera so we don't mess it up. And on our buildings now, let's go to MoGraph, Effector, and Shader. And it's just gonna make everything larger to start with. So let's go to the parameters and turn off the scale. So it's up here somewhere. Let's maybe bring it closer to the buildings. In the shading tab, there are two ways we could do this. One is to just use this shader section under custom shader, but we could also choose color and do the setup in some materials instead. So for this, we will need a new material to go along with this shader effector. In this new material, in the color channel, we are going to add in a noise map, and that's all we'll do for now. Let's leave that as it is. This is going to be the color guide material or color shader guide, something along those lines. And in the shader effector, when we switch this to color, it revealed this material tag link box. So we need a material tag to place in here. That means using our color guide material on the shader and then getting that tag onto the material tag section here. I think this would actually work even if you don't put the material tag onto this link box. If the material is on the shader effector, it's going to automatically pick it up. But if this had been on a different null object, for example, you would have to bring that material tag in here too. But either way, this setup is going to work. So far, nothing has changed because we also need to combine this shader effector with our actual material. So let's go to the material in the luminance channel, in the layers, and under shader, we are gonna go to MoGraph and color shader. Let's get back our interactive render region, and if I render this out right now, it's just going to be completely white with this new color shader. That's because we are adding the color shader on top of white already. And by that I mean, if I go to the cloners in the transform tab, the default color is white. So that's the base level color of the clones. I have to set this to be black. And when I do that, we are now going to see the effects of our shader effector. And these colors are based on this noise map in this color channel, which is linked to the shader effector. And we set this to color channel, and we pulled in that texture tag into here. So it's all linked together to create the effect you see here. And if I go into the noise map and change the seed value, it's going to generate a different pattern. So look at this building right over the center. If we change this around, you see it's changed to a different color. So what we can do now is use these grayscale values to assign different colors to the material. So going back to our building material, in the luminance channel, the grayscale colors are coming from this color shader. So we want to convert them to color, and the way to do this is to right click and throw this into a colorizer effect. So now we're going even further into this layer setup, and you could even go further into the color shader itself, but we're just pulling the color channel and nothing else. But inside the colorizer, we have this gradient, and we can start to dial in some colors into this. And as I do this, you should start to see the buildings change color. Right now it's going from this orange to white. That's the range we see. We want to put in different colors in here. Maybe a kind of teal after the orange. And we might go a bit pink. And maybe back to more of a blue color. So whatever colors we put into here, we are going to see remapped onto the black and white maps from our original noise map in this setup. So this appears too bright right now. It's not a great preview. That's because the luminance channel is at 200%. If I drop it down to 100, it's going to be more apparent what these colors are doing. And you'll also notice that I have weighted these ranges toward the left side of the color shader. That just happens to be the range where a lot of those black and white values end up. So it's going to work if you shift everything this way. Past a certain range, those colors are not really going to show through. So if I add in this extra color here, if I wanted to show up some more, I would have to shift it more towards the left. But that's just how that gradient is working in this particular case. So anyway, I think we have a pretty good range right now. Now we can go back to this level and set this colorizer's blending mode to color. And it's going to overlay on top of our lights material and that Fresnel effect to give us this final look. Of course, we also need to go back and make this brighter once again, so 200% to bring back the strength of our lights. So that's one of the things the shader effect can be used for, and hopefully that wasn't too confusing. We can go to this color guide material and we could change the seed once again, and it's going to change what pattern we see. And the buildings would be changing color. Let's render this to the picture viewer. It's better to compare these frame by frame. The default is 665. Let's render that one out. So each time we change the noise map around, we are going to get a different set of colors. A couple of things to fix before we finish up this material. There are some lights on top of the buildings that we want to get rid of. If you look here, the tops of the buildings don't have any lights on them. And also the Fresnel effect, it fades from the bottom of the building and slowly gets brighter towards the top. Whereas right now that Fresnel effect is just as strong at the bottom all the way to the top. And of course we do want to get rid of these lights. So one problem at a time. Let's start with fading the Fresnel from the top to the bottom. We are gonna go into the material once again. And for this, we're gonna have to create a folder. I've switched off the colorizer momentarily. And let's make a folder. Put the Fresnel into this folder along with a new gradient. And this gradient is going to be 3D. So if I change the type from 2DU to 3D linear, we have X, Y, and Z. We want to use the Y to create this 3D gradient. So this is the bottom part of the gradient, the start, and the end is the top. So the end I'm going to set to 2500. The reason for this is I know the tallest building in the scene is about 2300 or so. So if I just make this gradient a bit taller, that's going to cover from the smallest building to the tallest one. And you can already see that the lower section of these buildings is darker, and then the gradient gets brighter towards the top. So once again, if we drop down the brightness, that's going to be more obvious. It's an interesting effect in itself, but here we just want to use it as a mask. We can raise that initial black point, or where it starts to fade from. So maybe about here or so. And we can dial in the top part to be a bit brighter, so the light will be strongest in those parts. Let's go back to this level, and the gradient blending mode is going to be set to multiply. And if this were stronger, you would see those effects a bit more obviously. This is with the gradient. It's now fading from the lower side, but if I turn off the gradient, it's just going to be equally strong throughout. Let's re-enable this, and the strength of this whole folder will be about 25 also. And we need to set the blending mode to add, as we had the layer Fresnel by itself. So this can be normal now, because it's the whole folder we're adding together, these two layers combined. We can re-enable our colorizer and also put the brightness back up to 200%. And in the picture viewer, this is the comparison before and after. I just prefer this effect where it's more faded towards the top. Then finally, to cover up the lights at the tops of the buildings, we are going to use a different effect called the fall off. I've put this in the wrong place. It needs to be above everything. And this uses the angle of the different parts that make up our object. And if it's steeper, it's going to be brighter. So if I move this gradient to make this more obvious, you will see the top parts of the buildings are now brighter. We actually want to do the reverse. So invert the gradient. And by the way, this kind of thing would be used, for example, if you were trying to create a snowy mountain scene. You would use the fall off shader to have the snow at the top of the mountain, and as the mountain slopes down, the snow would disappear. So you would only have the snow caps at the top, much like we only have the white parts of the building here being at the top. Anyway, we want to invert the gradient so that the top parts are going to be black. And also let's push the white a bit further up. We don't want to affect the sides, only the very top parts of the buildings. And with this, I can go back to this level and set this layer to multiply. So the black parts are going to cover up anything below them. And sending this to the picture viewer, we get the final look of the material. So now the tops of the buildings are going to be dark.